Chapter 7 of the Firm of Girdlestone by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ashton Hoffman. England versus Scotland. The electoral election had come and had gone, but another great event had taken its place. It was the day of the England and Scotland rugby match. Better weather could not have been desired. The morning had been hazy, but as the sun shone out, the fog had gradually risen until now there remained but a suspicion of it floating like a plume above the frowning walls of Edinburgh Castle, twining a fairy wreath around the unfinished columns of the National Monument. Upon the Colton Hill, the broad stretch of the Prince's Street Gardens, which occupied the valley between the old town and the new, looking green and spring-like, and the fountains sparkling merrily in the sunshine. Their wide expanse, well trimmed and bepathed, formed a strange contrast to the rugged piles of grim old houses which bounded them upon the other side, and the massive grandeur of the great hill beyond, which lies like a crouching lion, keeping watch and ward day and night over the ancient capital of the Scottish kings. Travellers who have searched the whole world round have found no fairer view. So thought three of the genius who were ensconced that forenoon in the bow windows of the Royal Hotel, and gazed across the bright green valley at the dull historical background. Beyond one we already know, a Scottish gentleman, ruddy-faced and black-eyed, with checkered trousers, light waistcoat and a heavy chain, legs widely apparted, his hands in his pockets, and on his face that expression of irreverent and critical approval with which the travelled Briton usually regards the works of nature. By his side was a young lady in a tight-fitting travelling dress with a trim leather belt and a snow-white collar and cuffs. There was no criticism in her sweet face, now flushed with excitement, nothing but unqualified wonder and admiration at the beautiful scene before her. An elderly, placid-faced woman sat in a basket chair in the recesses and looked up with quiet, loving eyes at the swift play of emotions which swept over the girl's eager face. "Oh, Uncle George," she cried, it is really too heavenly. I can't realize that we are free. I can't help fearing that it is all a dream, and now I shall wake up to find myself pouring out Ezra Girdlestone's coffee, or listening to Mr. Girdlestone as he reads the morning quotations." The elder woman stroked the girl's hand caressingly, with a soft motherly palm. "Don't you think about it," she murmured. "No, don't think about it," echoed the doctor. "My wife is quite right. Don't think about it. But, dear me, what a job I had to persuade your guardian to let you go. I should have given it up in despair. I really should, if I had not known that you had set your heart upon it." "Oh, how good you both are to me!" cried the girl, in a pretty little gush of gratitude. "Pooh, Kate, but as to Girdlestone, he is perfectly right. If I had you, I should keep you fast to myself. I promise you, Matilda?" "That we would, George. Perfect tyrants, both of us, Matilda?" "Yes, George." "I am afraid I am not very useful in a household," said the girl. "I was too young to look after things for poor papa, but Girdlestone, of course, has a housekeeper of his own. I read the financial news to him after dinner every day, and I know all about stocks and consols and those American railways, which are perpetually rising and falling. One of them went wrong last week, and Ezra swore, and Mr. Girdlestone said that the Lord chastens those who he loves. He did not seem to like being chastened a bit. But how delightful this is! It is like living in another world." The girl was a pretty figure as she stood in the window, tall, lithe, and graceful, with the long, soft curves of budding womanhood. Her face was sweet rather than beautiful, but an artist would have revealed in the delicate strength of the soft, rounded chin and the quick, broad play of her expression. her hair of a deep rich brown with a bronze shimmer, where a sunbeam lay athwart it, swept back in those thick luxurious coils, which were the unfalling index of a strong womanly nature. Her deep blue eyes danced with life and light, while her slightly retrous nose and her sensitive smiling mouth all spoke of gentle good humor. From her sunny face to the dainty little shoe which peeped from under the trim black skirt, she was an eminently pleasant object to look upon. So thought the passers-by as they glanced up at the great bow window, and so too thought a young gentleman who had driven up to the hotel door, and who now bounded up the steps and into the room. He was enveloped in a long shaggy ulster which stretched down to his ankles, and he wore a velvet cap trimmed with silver stuck carelessly on the back of his powerful yellow-curled head. "Here's the boy," cried the mother gaily. "How are you, Mom, dear?" he cried, stooping over her to kiss her. "How are you, Dad? Good morning, Cousin Kate. You must come down and wish us luck. What a blessing that it is pretty warm. It is miserable for the spectators when there's an east wind. What do you think of it, Dad?" "I think you are an unnatural young renegade to play against your mother's country," said the sturdy doctor. "Oh, come, Dad, I was born in Scotland and I belong to a Scotch club. Surely that is good enough." "I hope you lose, then." "We are very likely to. Atkinson of the west of Scotland has strained his leg, and we shall have to play Blair of the Institution at full back. Not so good a man by a long way. The odds are 5-4 on the English this morning. They are said to be the very strongest lot they ever played in an international match. I have brought a cab with me, so the moment you are ready we can start." There were others besides the students who were excited about the coming struggle. All Edinburgh was in a ferment. Football is and always has been the national game of Scotland. Among those who affect a violent exercise, while golf takes its place with the more sedately inclined, there is no game so fitted to appeal to a hardy and active people as that composite exercise prescribed by the Rugby Union, in which 15 men pit strength, speed, endurance, and every manly attribute they possess in a prolonged struggle against 15 antagonists. There is no room for mere knack or trickery. It is fierce personal contest, in which the ball is the central rallying point. That ball may be kicked, pushed, or carried. It may be forced onwards in any conceivable manner towards the enemy's goal. The fleet of foot may seize it, and by superior speed thread their way through the ranks of their opponents. The heavy of frame may crush down all opposition by dead weight. The hardiest and most enduring must win. Even matches between prominent local clubs excite much interest in Edinburgh and attract crowds of spectators. How much more than when the pick of the manhood of Scotland were to try their strength against the very cream of the players from the south of the Tweed. The roads which converged on the Woburn Place grounds, on which the match was to be played, were dark with thousands wending their way in one direction. So thick was the moving mass that the carriage of the Dimsdale party had to go at a walk for the latter half of the journey, in spite of the objurgations of the driver, who, as a patriot, felt the responsibility which rested upon him in having one of the team in his charge, and the necessity there was for delivering him up by the appointed time. Many of the crowd recognized the young fellow, and waved their hands to him, or called out a few words of encouragement. Miss Kate Hodson and even the doctor began to reflect some of the interest and excitement which showed itself on every face around them. The youth alone seemed to be unaffected by the general enthusiasm, and spent the time in endeavoring to explain the principles of the game to his fair companion, whose ignorance of it was comprehensive and astounding. "You understand," he said, "that there are 15 players on each side, but it would not do for the whole of these 50 men to play in a crowd, for in that case, if the other side forced the ball past them, they would have nothing to fall back upon. No reserves, as it were. Therefore, as we play the game in Scotland, 10 men are told off to play in a knot. They are picked for their weight, strength, and endurance. They are called the forward and are supposed to be always on the ball, following it everywhere, never stopping or tiring. They are opposed, of course, by the forwards of the other side. Now, immediately behind the forwards are the two quarterbacks. They should be very active fellows, good dodgers, and fast runners. They never join in the very rough work, but they always follow on the outskirts of the forwards, and if the ball is forced past, it is their duty to pick it up and make away with it like lightning. If they are very fast, they may succeed in carrying it a long way before they are caught, tackled as we call it. It is their duty also to keep their eye on the quarterbacks of the enemy, and to tackle them if they get away. Behind them again are the two halfbacks, or three-quarters, as they call them in England. I am one of them. They are supposed to be a fast runner too, and a good deal of the tackling comes to their lot, for a good runner of the other side can often get past the quarters, and then the halves have got to bring him down. Behind the halfbacks is a single man, the back. He is the last resource when all others are past. He should be a sure and long kicker, so as to get the ball away from the goal by that means. But you are not listening. Oh, yes, I am, said Kate. As a matter of fact, the great throng and the novel sights were distracting her, so much that she found it hard to attend to her companion's disquisition. You'll understand it quickly enough when you see it, the student remarked cheerily. Here we are at the grounds. As he spoke, the carriage rattled through a broad gateway in a large open grassy space, with a great pavilion at one side of it, and a staked enclosure about 200 yards long and 100 broad, with a goal-post at each end. This space was marked out by gaily colored flags, and on every side of it, pressing against the barrier the whole way round, was an enormous crowd 20 and 30 deep, with others occupying every space of rising ground, or coing a vantage behind them. The most moderate competition would place the number of spectators at 15,000. At one side there was a line of cabs in the background, and thither the carriage of the Dimsdales drove, while Tom rushed off with his bag to the pavilion to change. It was high time to do so, for just as the carriage took up its position, hoarse roar burst from the great multitude and was taken up again and again. It was a welcome to the English team, which had just appeared upon the ground. There they were, clad in white knickerbockers and jerseys, with a single red rose embroidered upon their breasts, and a gallant-looking a set of young fellows as the whole world could produce. Tall, square-shouldered, straight-limbed, as active as kittens and as powerful as young bullocks. It was clear that they would take a lot of beating. They were the pick of the university and London clubs, with a few players from the northern counties. Not a man among them whose name was not known wherever football was played. That tall, long-legged youth is Evans, and the great halfback, who is said to be able to send a drop kick further than any of his predecessors in the annuals of the game. There is Bueller, the famous Cambridge quarter, only 10 stones in weight, but as lithe and slippery as an eel, and Jackson, the other quarter, is just such another herd to tackle himself, but his tensiest as a bulldog in holding an adversary. That one with the straw-colored hair is Coles, the great forward, and there are 9 lads of metal who will stand by him today, through thick and thin. They were a formidable-looking lot, and better which had been 5 or 4 to them in the morning showed symptoms of coming to 5 to 3 in the meantime. By no means abashed at finding themselves the cynosures of so many eyes, the Englishmen proceeded to keep up the circulation by leaping frog and horseplay, for the jerseys were thin and the wind bleak. But where were their adversaries? A few impatient moments slowly passed, and then from one corner of the ground there rose a second cheer, which rippled down the long line of onlookers, and swelled into a mighty shout as the Scotchmen vaulted over the barriers into the arena. It was a nice question for connoisseurs in physical beauty as to which team had the best of it in physique. The Northerners in their blue jerseys with a thistle upon their breasts were a sturdy, hard-bitten lot, averaging a couple of pounds more in weight than their opponents. The latter were perhaps more ruggedly and symmetrically built, and were pronounced by experts to be the faster team, but there was a massive gaunt look about the Scotch forwards which promised well for their endurance. Indeed, it was on the forwards that they principally relied. The presence of three such players as Bowler, Evans, and Jackson made the English exceptionally strong behind, but they had no men in front who were individually so strong and fast as Millers, Watts, and Gray. Dimsdale and Garraway, the Scotch half-backs, and Tookie, the quarter, whose blazing red head was a very oriflamme wherever the struggle waxed hottest, were the best men that the Northerners could boast of behind. The English had won the choice of goals and elected to play with what slight wind there was at their backs. A small thing may turn the scales between two evenly balanced teams. Evans, the captain, placed the ball in front of him upon the ground, with his men lying all along on either side, as eager as hounds to leash some 50 yards in front of him about the place where the ball would drop. The blue-vested Scots gathered in a swollen crowd. There was a sharp ring from a bell, a murmur of excitement from the crowd. Evans took 2 quick steps forward, and a yellow ball flew swift and straight, as if it had been shot from a cannon, right into the expected group in front of him. For a moment there was a grasping and turmoil among the Scotchmen, when from a crowd emerged Gray, the great Glasgow forward, the ball tucked well under his arm, his head down, running like the wind, with his 9 forwards in a dense clump behind him, ready to bear down all opposition, while the other 5 followed more slowly, covering a wide stretch of ground. He met the Englishman who had started full crying after the ball the moment that the captain had kicked it. The first hurled himself upon Gray without slackening his pace, swerved slightly, and he missed him. The second he passed in the same way, but the third caught quickly at his legs, and the Scotch flew head over heels and was promptly collared. Not much use collaring him now. In the very act of falling, he had thrown the ball behind him. Gordon of Paisley caught it and bore it on a dozen yards, when he was seized and knocked down, but not before he had bequeathed his trust to another, who struggled manfully for some paces before he too was brought to the ground. This pretty piece of passing had recovered for the Scotch all the advantage lost by the English kick-off, and was greeted by roars of applause from the crowd. And now there was a maul for scrimmage. Was there ever another race which did such things and called it play? 20 young men, so blended and inextricable, mixed that no one could assign their various arms and legs to their respective owners, or strain every muscle and fiber of their bodies against each other, and yet are so well balanced that the dense clump of humanity stands absolutely motionless. In the center is an inextricable chaos where shoulders heave and heads rise and fall. At the edges are a fringe of legs, and legs in extreme state of tension, ever pulling for a firmer foothold, and apparently completely independent of the rest of their owners, whose heads and bodies have bored their way into the melee. The pressure is tremendous, yet neither side gives an inch. Just on the skirts of the throng, with bent bodies and hands on knees, stand the cool little quarterbacks, watching the gasping giants, and also keeping a keen eye upon each other. Let the ball emerge near one of these, and he will whip it up and be 10 paces off before those in the mall even know that it is gone. Behind them again are the halves, alert and watchful, while the back, with his hands in his pockets, has an easy consciousness that he will have plenty of warning before the ball can pass the 4 good men who stand between the mall and himself. Now the dense throng sways a little backwards and forwards, an inch is lost and an inch is gained. The crowd roar with delight. Mauled Scotland, mauled England, England, Scotland. The shouting would stir the blood of the mildest mortal that ever breathed. Kate Hudson stands in the carriage, rosy with excitement and enjoyment. Her heart is all with the wearers of the rose, in spite of the presence of her old playmate in the opposite ranks. The doctor is as much delighted as the youngest man on the ground, and the cabman waves his arms and shouts in a highly indecorous fashion. The 2 pounds difference in weight is beginning to tell. The English swayed back a yard or 2. A blue coat emerged among the white ones. He has fought his way through, but has left the ball behind him, so he dashes round and puts his weight behind it once more. There is a last upheaval. The mall is split in 2, and through the rent comes the redoubtable Scotch, forwards with the ball amongst them. The solid phalanx has scattered the English like spray to the right and left. There is no one in front of them, no one but a single little man, almost a boy in size and weight. Surely he cannot hope to stop the tremendous rush. The ball is a few yards in advance of the leading Scot. When he springs forward at it, he seized it in an instant before his adversary, and with the same motion writhed himself free from the man's grasp. Now is the time for the crack Cambridge quarterback to show what he is made of. The crowd yell with excitement. To the right and left run the great Scotch forwards, grasping and slipping, pursuing, and right in the midst of them is a quick and as erratic as a trout in a pool runs the calm-faced little man, dodging one, avoiding another, slipping between the fingers of 2 others. Surely he is caught now. No, he has passed all the forwards and emerges from the ruck of men pelting along at the tremendous pace. He has dodged one of the Scotch quarters and outstrips the other. Well played, England, shouted the crowd. Well run, Bueller. Now Turkey. Now Dimsdale. Well collared, Dimsdale. Well collared, indeed. The little quarterback has come to an end of his career, for Tom had been as quick as he and had caught him round the waist and attempted to pass, and brought him to the ground. The cheers were hearty, for the 2 half-backs were the only university men in the team, and there were hundreds of students among the spectators. The good doctor colored up with pleasure to hear his boy's name bellowed forth approvingly by thousands of excited lungs. The play is, as all good judges said it would be, very equal. For the first 40 minutes, every advantage gained by either side had been promptly neutralized by the desperate effort on the part of the other. The mass of struggling players has swayed backwards and forwards, but never more than 20 or 30 yards from the center of the ground. Neither goal had been seriously threatened as yet. The spectators failed to see how the odds lay on England or justified, but the fancy abide by the choice in the second 40. It is thought that the superior speed and staying power of the Southerners will tell over the heavier Scots. There seems little the matter with the latter as yet, as they stand in a group, wiping their grimy faces and discussing the state of the game. for at the end of 40 minutes the goals are changed and there is a slight interval. And now the last hour is to prove whether there are good men bred in the hungry north, as any who live on more fruitful ground and beneath warmer skies. If the play was desperate before, it became even more so. Now each member of either team played as if upon him alone depended the issue of the match. Again and again, Gray, Anderson, Gordon, and the redoubtable phalanx of disheveled, hard-breathing Scotch broke away with the ball, but as often the English quarter and half-backs, by their superior speed, more than made up for the weakness of the forwards, and carried the struggle back in the enemy's ground. 2 or 3 times Evans, the long kicker, who was credited with the power of reaching the goal from almost any part of the ground, got hold of the ball, but each time before he could kick, he was charged by someone of his adversaries. At last, however, his chance came. The ball trickled out of the maul into the hands of Buller, who at once turned and threw it to the half-back behind him. There was no time to reach him. He took a quick glance at the distant goal, a short run forward, and his long limbs swung through the air with tremendous force. There was a deadly silence of suspense among the crowd as the ball described a lofty parabola. Down it came, down, as straight and true as an arrow, just grazing the crossbar and pitching on the grass beyond, and the groans of a few afflicted patriots were drowned by the hearty cheers which hailed the English goal. But the victory was not won yet. There were 10 minutes left for the Scotchmen to recover this blow, or for the Englishmen to improve upon it. The Northerners played so fiercely that the ball was kept down near the English goal, which was only saved by the splendid defensive play of their backs. 5 minutes passed, and the Scots in turn were being pressed back. A series of brilliant runs by Buller, Jackson, and Evans took the fight into the enemy's country and kept it there. It seemed as if the visitors meant scoring again, when a sudden change occurred in the state of affairs. It was but 3 minutes off the calling of time when Tookie, one of the Scotch quarterbacks, got hold of the ball and made a magnificent run, passing right through the opposite forwards and quarters. He was collared by Evans, but immediately threw the ball behind him. Dimsdale had followed up the quarterback and caught the ball when it was thrown backwards. Now or never, the lad felt that he would sacrifice anything to pass the 3 men who stood between him and the English goal. He passed Evans like the wind before the halfback could disentangle himself from Tookie. There were but 2 now to oppose him. The first was the other English halfback, a broad-shouldered, powerful fellow who rushed at him, but Tom, without attempting to avoid him, lowered his head and drove at him full tilt, with such violence that both men reeled back from the collision. Dimsdale recovered himself first, however, and got past before the other had time to seize him. The goal was now not more than 20 yards off, with only one between Tom and it. Though half a dozen more were in close pursuit, the English back caught him round the waist, while another from behind seized the collar of his jersey, and the 3 came heavily to the ground together. But the deed was done. In the very act of falling, he had managed to kick the ball, which flickered feebly up into the air and just came clear the English bar. It had scarcely touched the ground upon the other side when the ringing of the great bell announced termination of the match, though its sound was entirely drowned by the tumultuous shouting of the crowd. 1,000 hats were thrown into the air, 10,000 voices joined in the roar, and meanwhile the cause of all this outcry was still sitting on the ground, smiling, it is true, but very pale, and with one of his arms dangling useless from his shoulder. Well, the breaking of a collarbone is a small price to pay for the saving of such a match as that, so thought Tom Dimsdale, as he made for the pavilion, with his father keeping off the exultant crowd upon one side and Jack Garraway upon the other. The doctor butted a path through the dense, half-crazed mob with a vigor which showed that his son's talent in that direction were hereditary. Within half an hour Tom was safely ensconced in the corner of the carriage, with his shoulder braced back secundum artem, and his arm supported by a sling. How quietly and deftly the two women slipped a shawl here and a rug there to save him from the jarring of the carriage. It is part of the angel nature of women that when youth and strength are maimed and helpless, they appeal to her more than they can even do in the pride and flush of their power. Here lies the compensation of the unfortunate Kate's dark blue eyes filled with infallible compassion as she bent over him, and he, catching sight of that expression, felt a sudden new unaccountable spring of joy bubble up in his heart, which made all previous hopes and pleasures seem vapid and meaningless. The little god shoots hard and straight when his mark is still in the gold drawn of life. All the way back he lay with his head among the cushions, dreaming of ministering angels, his whole soul steeped in quiet contentment as it dwelt upon the sweet earnest eyes which had looked so tenderly into his. It had been an eventful day with the students. He had saved his side, he had broken his collarbone, and now, most seriously of all, he had realized that he was hopelessly in love. End of chapter 7.